What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Week 1 recap, Week 2 preview for Major League Balatro. We have a ton to go over in today's video, so let's jump right into it with the recap of last week's games. Our first game to go over is Gothic Lord UK versus Nido, a fantastic match from last season, which Nido, I believe, won 2-1. In the first game, we went to Gold Stake with Gothic's choice and then Yellow Deck for Nido's. It was a back and forth affair in terms of who we thought was going to be able to win the PvP, but consistently throughout the entire game, all 4 PvPs, Gothic was the one to come out on top with a pretty traditional Gold Stake build, and he went into game 2 up 1-0. Game 2, Nido took it to Black Stake. Gothic wanted Painted Deck, and this game was a little bit closer with Gothic winning 2 lives to none. Nido's setup at the end was very solid. Unfortunately for Nido, she did not find the photograph that Gothic did, and that ended up being the huge difference with both players having the Chad, but Nido also having a Dusk. The final game went back to Gold Stake. This time Nido selected Ghost Deck to play it on, and unfortunately for Nido, they just could not get out of the small blind after losing a life in the PvP battle. All in all, Gothic played phenomenally, but so did Nido. It was a really tough set of Gold Stake games, and I think on the Black Stake game, honestly, Nido played it very well and just got a little unlucky with the Joker rerolls, but we do have to give credit to Gothic here, taking the 3-0 in Game 1 of Major League Balatro. The second game of the week was myself versus HC Justin. This was Justin's first game in the league, and for the very first game of the match, we went on Yellow Deck White Stake, which is an interesting combo because Yellow Deck is mostly played on Gold Stakes in Major League Balatro. I was able to come out with the victory, but Justin's build was actually very similar. The difference ended up being a couple X-Molt Jokers and some glass. We move on to game 2, which was played on Ghost Deck Black Stake, and after some pretty great lucky hits with my 5s, I was able to put up a ridiculous E14 score with Bloodstone, Ancient Joker, and Hack, and just due to the econ difference, we did not see Justin find those things, and the final game was played on Red Deck White Stake, where once again retriggers were kind of the difference, this time very early on in the game after Justin lost a life to the blind. So it was really just some greedy Joker glass play that was the difference in this one. All in all, I come away with the 3-0 victory in game 1 for myself. Justin unable to get a point on the board, but I'll be rooting for him throughout the rest of the league. The next game, we had another first with Rarran having their first ever game in Major League Balatro, but definitely not their first ever multiplayer game. And they showcased that in game 1 of Checker Deck Gold Stake, in which Rarran pulled off the upset on Roffle's pick of Stake, really winning due to the ability to create more glass red seal cards. Game 2 went to Plasma White Stake, where Roffle flipped the script and 4-0'd Rarran, finding an idol and a Bloodstone due to better economy. Game 3 went to Plasma White Stake again. However, this time, Rarran was the one with the better economy, finding Dusk, finding Chad, and having that be the huge difference in the game, winning 2 lives to nothing, and Rarran taking the match 2-1 against the Season 1 champion Roffle. What a way to announce your presence in Major League Balatro. C-Dubs versus Nandre was up next, and we knew this was going to be an interesting battle, with C-Dubs changing up strategies this season and Nandre being one of our favorites of always going Plasma Deck. Game 1, however, would be Erratic Deck White Stake, and it was honestly a pretty close match despite the 4-0. Unfortunately for Nandre, they made an accidental play forgetting that the Bloodstone was not eternal with an Ankh, which ended up costing us what would have been a very close final, or at least 5th PvP. Then we moved on to Nandre's favorite, Plasma Deck White Stake. The difference here ended up being re-triggers with an idol, that C-Dubs was able to find. Nandri missing out on the idol when C-Dubs only had 2 lives left. C-Dubs taking that one. And then finally, game 3 was extraordinarily close once again on Plasma deck White Stake, but the chips were simply just not enough to fight Photo Chad, and C-Dubs walked away with the 3-0 life victory there and takes the match, the first ever match win for C-Dubs in Major League Balatro, 3-0. Next up, we have Fur versus Edzy. Edzy, of course, the runner-up in Major League Balatro Season 1, and Fur, a newcomer to the league. This was not going to be an easy match for Fur, and the first game was Gold Stake Yellow deck. Fur just simply unable to get out of one of the big blinds, but was able to take a life off of Edzy. Edzy winning this 3 lives to none. Game 2 went to Black Stake Red deck, and it was a tribulate seed. It was a ton of points, and Fur came ever so close with just a couple of Joker decisions costing for the game. Edzy taking this one 2-0, and then we went to a Plasma deck Gold Stake game, and as you can imagine, this was absolutely brutal. Fur was just unable to get out of a small blind after losing a life in the PvP, and Edzy takes it 2-0 here and completes the sweep 3 games to none in the first ever Major League Balatro match. Balatro Spare and Halion would be the competitors in our next match, both Major League Balatro veterans. First, they would play White Stake Abandoned deck, where Hack and Red Seal Glass would be the difference. Halion able to take this one 2 lives to nothing with a huge score. In game 2, we went to Checkered deck Black Stake, something a little bit more interesting, something maybe Halion isn't as used to. The difference here, once again, was Glass, but this time it was on the side of Balatro Bear. Also having some extra retriggers with Seltzer Dusk for his Bloodstone. Game 3, we would have to go down to the final PvP blind for this one. Bear with a little bit of a Baron and retrigger build. It was really interesting to watch, but at the end of the day, really the difference was all the red seals that Bear had, all the deck manipulation, lots of red seals, steals, red seal, glass cards, and was able to just sneak out this match victory in this game victory 2-1 over Halion. Scooty and Mouth would be the host for our second game, and unfortunately in game 1 we had a disconnect from Scooty. The verdict for now is going to be that Mouth was going to win this Gold Stake battle. However, we will replay this game if needed in the future, as the rules are going to be if any disconnect happens there must be a replay unless it was 100% clear who was going to win the game due to it being one of the final PvPs or something of that nature. But anyway, we move on to game 2, which was also Gold Stake Red deck, and it was a Perkeo seed. And Mouth had a crazy idea to skip for a charm tag, was able to find an earlier death fool, meaning they were able to get a death into their consumable slot and copy it, which led to a snowball effect, and Mouth taking game 2 in incredible fashion with 2 lives remaining. And then finally, we had Gold Stake Yellow deck, where Scooty was able to be the one to come out on top with loads of X-Molt, kind of going all out to win the PvP with 4 lives remaining and not allow Mouth time to build into what he wanted to do. All in all, Mouth, for the time being, takes this match 2-1. Our final match of the week was the one that many people were looking forward to the most. We had newcomer Turtle Bean, but multiplayer expert, new to the league, Dr. Spectre, one of the semi-finalists from last season, widely considered the Balatro GOAT. Every single game would be played on Ghost deck White Stake, and the first one came down to simply Red Seal Glass being the difference, with Bean actually being the one with a little bit more deck manipulation, not something you say much when you're going up against Dr. Spectre. Game 2, we once again had that huge re-triggering build, and once again it came down to kind of having the deck pre-manipulated, allowed Bean to skip when Ancient Joker was on Hearts, and was able to get the Bloodstone and Ancient Joker procs to surpass Dr. Spectre by almost E10. And then the final game was actually a Tribulate seed, and this one was extraordinary close. The difference was a ×6, and that ×6 was simply one extra hand size from a voucher on Bean's side of things, as well as the fact that their flush 5 was 4 levels higher. The builds were exactly the same in the end. Doctor did great to crawl back in that game, but down to the final PvP round of game 3, Bean was able to complete the sweep 3-0 against Dr. Spectre in their first ever Major League Balatro game. We now move on to the standings after 1 week of play. In the Onyx division, myself and Gothic Lord top the division with 4 points. Rarran and Balenos Bear are tied behind us with 3. Roffle and Halion both at 1, and Nito and Justin at 0. In the Bloodstone division, what a sight to see. C-Dubs, who unfortunately came in last place last time, is now leading the division with 4 points, tied with Edzy and Bean. Mouth sitting there with 3 points. Scooty with 1, and Nandri, Fur, and Dr. Spectre all looking for their first points of the season in week 2. It is now time to talk about the fantasy performances in week 1. Bean is your fantasy player of the week, totaling 134 points. Playing that ghost deck White Stake 3 times against Doctor, was able to get a huge high score, as well as winning the match 3-0. Myself coming in with 105, Gothic and C-Dubs also incredible performances at 103, 100, Edzy at 92. Some maybe disappointments is if you spent up on Roffle, who's $6 at 52 points. Dr. Spectre was a very popular pick at 47 points. And we can actually take a look at the lineup stats for week 1, and Bean was by far the most picked and absolutely came through, but Dr. Spectre picked by 50+% of players not really performing. And I think if you were one of the very few people, under 10% of people who picked Gothic Lord and Edzy, you were in a great spot this week. We look at the standings, and the winner of the week 1 prize is going to be Busta Fox, and we'll be having that 410 points carrying on the rest of the season. Just a quick reminder that you can visit mlbalatro.com to find the schedule and the standings at any point during the season. We are working on the bigger website, but this is a stand-in website made by Disco that is fantastic, that has really all the crucial information. Also, I wanted to shout out our new merch shop for Major League Balatro. We have both hat designs from last season still here. We also have the Major League Balatro stickers. We are working on some new designs. Nito is cooking some things up, and we're excited to showcase those in the future. Now let's take a look at that schedule for week 2. The first game is actually on Sunday, August 24th. So if you're watching this video early when it just comes out, you will be able to catch Fur and C-Dubs live at 3 p.m. Eastern. Monday, we have 2 games. We got Gothic Lord UK and Halion in the morning on the West Coast, 1 p.m. Eastern. And then myself and Balenos Bear are going to be playing a nightcap at 8 p.m. Eastern. Tuesday, we have Roffle and HC Justin playing it out at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Rarran versus Nito, 5 p.m. That is our first featured game of the week. We also have Nandri Scooty Wednesday, August 27th at 5 p.m. Eastern. I should be able to cast that one. Thursday, we have Dr. Spectre versus Mouth at 3 p.m. Eastern. And Friday, Edzy versus Bean at 3 p.m. Eastern. That is another featured match that will be casted by myself. Now it's time to get in the previews, and the first one will be Fur versus C-Dubs. I actually think this is an extraordinarily intriguing matchup. I think Fur wants to play on those middle stakes, black through purple. I think C-Dubs, seeing the success on the lower stakes, may keep it at white stake after the games against Andre. I'm really unsure. I think C-Dubs is a little bit of a wild card this season, but should be coming into this game very confident. With that said, I would not be shocked if Fur gets their first match win in this game, because Fur played against Edzy so incredibly well. I think Edzy is actually the toughest test to have your first game in Major League Balatro. Maybe not the champion like Roffle, but the way Edzy plays and the way Edzy forces you onto gold stake, which is really uncomfortable for your first game in Major League Balatro, it can be tough, and Fur just handled it really well. Fur was right there in the game with Edzy, and it was some micro min-maxing decisions. I think C-Dubs versus Fur will be very close. And I think Fur's also a sneaky pick for fantasy this week because I don't think we're going to be seeing a ton of Gold Stake gameplay in this one, which means higher scores. Fur, again, a $3 player because they're new to the league, and they could pull out the victory here. But I don't want to disrespect C-Dubs. They played phenomenally in week 1, and it's not going to be an easy test for Fur, but I do think this game is going to be rather close. Gothic Lord UK versus Halion. This was a fantastic matchup last season. If you can watch this one at 1 p.m. Eastern on Monday, I highly recommend it. I think Gothic Lord is going to take Halion all the way to Gold Stake, at the very least purple, but I think it is going to be gold. Put Halion on something maybe Halion's a little bit more uncomfortable with, often practicing white or black stake. And on the flip side, I do think Halion will pick white stake. And this is one of the games that, maybe to the surprise of some, in my opinion, really matters who wins the coin toss. I actually think Gothic Lord has a big advantage on higher stakes, and Halion has a pretty sizable advantage on the lower stakes in terms of Halion's really good at min-maxing with these small, score requirements that comes with lower stakes and just the more options you have. And I think Gothic Lord has really honed their skills on higher stakes multiplayer, trying to make themselves maybe the Edsy of this division. So watch out for that. Watch out for who wins this coin toss. But all in all, I think you're going to see really good gameplay. I think you're also going to see some interesting deck selections. Halion does like abandoned deck, and I think that will be kind of Halion's comfort zone if this goes on higher stakes. Gothic Lord UK, look out to be making some really tough choices if it's lower stakes gameplay, something like a black deck or painted deck, to just throw in some toughness back into the game, if you will. Even though it's white stake, playing on black deck, having one less hand is annoying for min-maxing. Painted deck, you can only have 4 joker slots, so you can only min-max so much with so much utility on white stake. And I think that's where Gothic tries to get the advantage back when the stake is played lower. But both these competitors, fantastic. This is going to be one of the more interesting matches of the week, in my opinion. Now we have my game versus my good friend Balatro Bear. Last year, Balatro Bear, I believe, won the game 2-1 over me. It was a fun time. Bear hit me with the classic Baron Mime setup, and I was unable to get past it. I also made a silly mistake in the game 3 final ante in the small blind that kind of pulled the option of having a great PvP to end it. I'm not going to make the same mistake this year. I think we're going to have 3 incredible games. I think Balatro Bear and I both want to play on lower stakes. I probably take Bear to at least black stake on my choice, but I'm really debating, do I do that, or do I just choose the deck knowing that Bear's going to keep it lower and try and find a deck I think I have an advantage over Bear on. I do think both of us are fantastic fantasy options this week. I think we are going to see extraordinarily high scoring games that are going to last the distance. So you may not get a ton of points with the lives remaining. You may not get a 3-0 sweep. But what you will get is kind of a safe selection where we're both putting up, really high points, 50s, 60s, 70s, due to just the high scores we get. I imagine both of us gain ease. Now, that's not a guarantee, but I do think this one, if you really like the watch the score go up type of gameplay, you're going to enjoy this one. And at the end of the day, I think it's all going to come down to who deck manipulated better. Also, crucially, we saw Bear kind of have an in-betweener build when they beat Halion. And I'm not going to say that was a wrong play, but can Bear kind of make that decision to go to re-triggering X-Molt instead of kind of that Baron Mime setup when it's presented to him in a early fashion? Can Bear utilize all the glass red seal to their advantage? And for me, I have this thing where I min-max maybe sometimes too much and I lose too many early lives, and then Bear could easily steamroll me. We saw it last year. So really intriguing matchup. I think this is going to be another banger on Monday. Next, we got Roffle versus HC Justin, 3:30 on Tuesday. I think Justin, really tough test to start out Major League Balatro, taking on me and taking on Roffle. What I will say is, throughout our games, Justin was consistently making the correct Joker decisions. Maybe Justin could lean a little bit more into econ, but I think that is a core part of Major League Balatro, of multiplayer Balatros. First of all, you have to be making the right Joker decisions. When you see stuff like a Dusk or an Idol, it's like you go for that. And I do think Justin's already there, which is impressive, and it's a little bit scary for Roffle. Now, where I do think Roffle's going to have the advantage is if they take the higher stakes. Funny enough, Justin is mainly a higher stake player, but again, gold stake on multiplayer is its own beast, and Roffle, after dropping points to Rarran, I think is going to have no holds bar, is going to absolutely take Justin to those higher stakes. I'm looking, how does Justin get a game or two off of Roffle in this one? And I really do think it will come down to consistently making those correct Joker decisions, as Justin has been, and then combining that with some more deck manipulation, a little bit more tarot generation, if you will, just utilizing the utility just a tad bit more. But it's clear Justin knows how to get the big number score. And anything can happen on gold stakes if Roffle does go that route. So this game, really intriguing. Again, another tough test for Justin, but I think they are up for it. I would love to watch Justin, pull off an upset here. Roffle, former champion in my own division, so obviously biased with that. But it is hard pressed for me to say that Roffle is not worth the $6 in this week, just because I do think there will be at least one game on lower stakes here against Justin where Roffle could get a really big score. But I also think Roffle's coming in as a favorite into this matchup. Rarran versus Nito is our next one and our first featured match of the week for that Tuesday 5 p.m. Eastern slot. Rarran just coming out of the gate on fire, taking down Roffle. The thing is, can Nito, who wasn't able to put up a point in their first game, I don't want to say pull off an upset, but pull together some points in this one? And my guess would be yes. I'm a really big Nito believer. We saw last year towards the end, Nito was taking points off of players left and right, getting some wins. And then it came down to the final week, and Nito was ever so close to 2-0ing Roffle. And then even furthermore, in the third game of their series, I think Nito was very close to winning again. Like, if we had the traditional format, Nito was one decision away from 3-0ing Roffle last year. So Nito absolutely capable of taking all three games in this matchup against Rarran. I do think all of the games are going to be on lower stakes. I do think this is another one where you're going to get a lot of fantasy value out of the players due to the high scores. What I'm curious is, can Nito do the deck manipulation fast enough, make the glass cards quick enough to take on Rarran? We saw Rarran do such a good job of that they outpaced Roffle, our champion, which is just almost unheard of in 2 out of the 3 games. And that's something Nito needs to be wary of. Or on the flip side, I do think Nito needs to take maybe a Dr. Spectred approach, and this is really anyone against Rarran, being like, well, Rarran is going to rush the glass, the high scoring build. Maybe we just kind of not throw the early PvPs, but not worry about them. Go full utility, build into your deck, and you get that one life power spike, as Doctor calls it, and that's when you start really making sure you have your build where you want it to be, and you take the next 4 lives off of Rarran. I think that's a very viable strategy, just because I think Rarran is so good at the early game getting points on the board that maybe you can surpass Rarran in the utility department and then take a lead that way. But again, I think this is going to be a really interesting match. I think it's going to be all lower stakes. On Wednesday, we have Nandre versus Scooty, which is a rematch of a week 1 game from last season. And I vividly remember this one because Nandre and Scooty went back and forth. It was an incredible game to watch. And I do think Nandre may want to stick to Plasma, but Scooty is absolutely going to go to Gold Stake. So I think the question here is, does Nandre want to play Plasma Gold Stake? It is such a brutal combination. But I think if anyone has an advantage on it, again, it would be the person who plays Plasma the most consistently is practicing it, and is just generally really good at feeling where those chips are, where your scoring is. That would be Nandre. So I don't think this is going to be a pretty game, in that I don't think it's going to be all white stake, ghost deck type of thing where you're going to see the really big high score, maybe not fantasy value in that way. But I do think this is a very entertaining game. I think Scooty versus Nandre is going to have some of the most interesting decisions out of any game this week because it is going to be played on these really tough deck plus stake combinations. Speaking of that, I do also think it'll be very interesting, if Scooty takes it to gold stake, does Nandre go plasma as one decision? But when Nandre gets the first decision, does he pick the stake? Does he not let Scooty take it to gold stake? Or does Nandre say, plasma, do you want to play plasma gold stake? And maybe that even forces Scooty off of playing the gold stake and kind of forces Scooty's hand to bring it down a notch because it's just so unbearable to play that combination, at least in my opinion. And that's just in single player. In multiplayer, it's a whole nother beast. So I think this will be really fun from the decision-making process of like what to play, but in game, because of these combinations, you're going to have a lot of interesting decisions. I think the way Nandre and Scooty go about it is really fun to watch. They're going to take some risks. We saw Scooty not being afraid of skipping, which, it has its risks, it has its rewards, but it is undoubtedly fun. It creates divergence. If you have time, I highly recommend to watch this game. And again, I plan on casting it on my stream, but go watch Nandre's stream, go watch Scooty's stream, go watch the decisions that these two make. It's going to be a great one. In our penultimate game of the week, we have another rematch actually from week 1 of last year, Dr. Spectre versus Malf. And we know Malf is going to go gold stake, and this is going to be Dr. Spectre's first game for Major League Balatro Season 2, taking it to higher stakes, where I actually think Doc has an advantage on almost everyone, bar maybe Edsy. So this is tough for Malf. I think Malf just feels so much more comfortable on those gold stake games, but Doc is so good at them. I don't think that's going to change Malf's decision at all. I think we know what we're going to play in this one, and I think it's hard not to give Doc the advantage. But we saw last season, Malf was a single life away from taking the game against Doc 2-1. And it's hard to say that Doc didn't get bailed out in the end in the final game last season. So it's going to be close. I do think Malf's best shot is on those higher stakes. I think Doc definitely takes it to lower stakes if it's their choice. So with all that said, the interesting part is, what deck do we play? What deck does Doc go with? What deck does Malf go with? Where is the arena for these gold stake games? And then maybe on Dr. Spectre's choice, the lower stakes games. I think you also have to look out here. I think Malf has been playing very technically sound. I think they have just been getting better and better at gold stake multiplayer, to the point where they're often making decisions, the same decisions you'd see Edsy make. A little bit less skipping on Malf, and a little bit less erratic gameplay, and when they do skip, it's very fundamentally sound, like we saw with the double per KO seed against Scooty, where I need to get something in that consumable slot. I am going to skip for a charm tag, which is a little scary, but it absolutely worked out, creating basically infinite deaths on Malf's end. So all in all, I want to say Malf a lot more grounded in their gold stake gameplay, and you take that with the fact that they almost beat Dr. Spectre last year, and I think they've done nothing but improve, and I think Malf has a real shot in this game on the gold stake ones. Not that Malf doesn't have a shot on lower stakes. Anything can happen, but I think those ones heavily favor Balatro University. And finally, we have Edsy versus Bean for our final featured game of the week, and final game of the week at 3 p.m. Eastern on Friday. I could not be looking forward to this more. We saw Bean, flex their muscles on their favorite deck and stake combo, which is ghost deck white stake, which is kind of the ultimate playground of, you have spectral cards available to you for deck manipulation. You're playing on white stake. It is just a lot of players' dreams, because you have everything available to you, and I don't think the choices are hard. It's just like, who can min-max the absolute best, who can get the best value out of every single blind. But in my opinion, as a caster, I think oftentimes on ghost deck white stake, when you have two incredible players like a Doctor and a Bean, some of it comes down to a little bit of luck, of just like what tarots showed up in order, like what tarots were you blocking in the shop when you open the pack, and not necessarily always down to skill. In this game against our runner-up last year, Edsy's taking it to gold stake on their choice every single time, no holds bar, and I would love to watch Bean fight it out on gold stake. Bean has plenty of gold stake multiplayer experience, but was it against Edsy? Was it against the grandfather of gold stake Balatro multiplayer gameplay? I don't know. This one's going to be very entertaining. And then Edsy, Was their downfall in the final against Roffle? Can Edzy manipulate the deck, do enough min-maxing on white stake where Bean is going to take it to take a win off of Bean's stake choice? And I think it's possible, but I think Edzy's going to be practicing all week on that exact type of game, a ghost deck white stake or zodiac deck white stake, whatever Edzy's deck choice would be, in learning how to min-max when you have much more resources available to you instead of just survive and min-max there in that gold stake environment. And that's it. Thank you for watching the week 1 recap, the week 2 preview. Don't forget all the links down below. Join the Discord. Visit mlbalatro.com to get the schedule and standings. Visit our merch store. Join the Fantasizer link. Join our fantasy league. Even if you're a week behind, you are going to be in a pretty big hole to try and win the season-long competition, but I'm going to try and give away prizes every single week. And comment down below, which matchup are you looking forward to the most? Comment down below what your fantasy lineup looks like. And thank you so much for all the support for Major League Balatro Season 2, and we'll see you soon.